Hi folks, this is Meredith from the Papery Craftery, and today we're going to be making some quilling paper peony flowers. To start off with paper, I'm using the wider width today. This is 3/8 inch wide quilling paper strips. I have three kind of pinkish colors that go together and a little bit of sage green. We're also going to be needing some pale yellow. I have my needle tool, I have some tweezers, I have some small craft scissors as well. We are going to be using our workboard just a little bit, but mainly just to dip our glue into. And I'm going to be using the original formula of Aleene's Tacky Glue today. Now what's going to make this project really different is that we're going to be making the base for it by painting a watercolor painting first. So we're going to need some watercolor paper. You don't need to get the best kind you can. This is kind of a middle grade paper, but it really is going to absorb the water nicely, and that's what you want. I have just a round paintbrush, a pencil just for a tiny quick sketch, and then I also have a watercolor palette here. Again, this is not a fancy watercolor palette. You're going to need a little bit of clean water, and you're also going to need a paper towel. But let's first look at some peony flower reference photos. In case you're not familiar, they have a lot of very thin leaves in kind of circles around a yellow center with a stamen. But they're sort of ball shaped. They're very round flowers as they bloom, and then the petals fall away as they get more mature. And this type of flower can be tricky to make in quilling because it's hard to get all the layers of the petals. So what we're doing today is going to be an on-edge style creation, but it's going to be more of like a loose idea of a peony instead of an exact replica. Those are out there in quilling. If you're looking for that type of project, this isn't it. But this is just kind of a different take on it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our watercolor paper and we're going to draw two circles with our pencil lightly. We don't need to really dig into the paper here. We just want two loose circles, kind of looking like a fried egg. I think that center circle is a little bit too small, so I'm going to erase that and make just a little bit bigger of a circle. These are just kind of guidelines for your painting. I also want to mention that this technique that I'm doing to paint the peony flower is based off of a video I found on TikTok. I couldn't find it on YouTube to link here, but it's by an artist named Sincerely Yen on TikTok. This is based off of her design of making a peony. So she does beautiful work if you'd like to go find her as well. After I drew my two circles, I also made a quick stem just by one swipe of my pencil down my paper. Now I'm going to make a second version of this peony as well, and this is also based off of Sincerely Yen's painting tutorial. Similar idea, two circles, but this time the smaller circle is more towards the bottom of the larger circle instead of right in the middle. So this is going to be two different peonies. One is you're looking straight at it as it's fully blooming. This one is more of a kind of side profile so you can see the whole ball shape at once. So now we're going to get started with our painting. Again, this is optional. You don't have to do this. This is going to add a little bit of depth to your creation, just a little bit of like an underlying color, which is going to add to the idea of all of those petals that we saw in the reference photos. Remember, we're not making all those petals, but the painting is going to give the illusion of all that color. I am making sort of a three-toned pinkish kind of coral colored peony, and so I'm adding a little bit of red, a little bit of orange, and then a tiny bit of yellow just to make that light kind of coral shade. I am also going to get just a little bit of yellow mixed with a tiny bit of orange ready as well. That's going to be the stamen color that's going to go in the center of my flower. I'm going to start with that and load up my brush with a little bit of the yellow paint. Dab off a little bit extra if you need to. Right in the center of my two yellow circles. This is the one we drew first. Just drawing a couple little yellow dots. And you can wait till that's dry if you'd like to, or you can go right in with your coral or whatever color you want your main color of your flower to be. And you're making little C shapes, like the letter C, all around the outside of that inner circle. If they touch the yellow paint and it's still wet, the two colors will run together. That is the beauty of watercolor. It will happen, it is okay. If you want to make it a little darker, you can add some more paint. You can also do this after it's dry. For the ease of making this video a little bit shorter than it could be, I'm just going wet on wet at this point. And then you're going to move towards the outside of that circle, still making little C shapes around the inner circle, but you're going to have them be a little bit lighter in color as you go out. The way you can make watercolor lighter in color is by using more water, a little bit less pigment. So I reach back into my cup and I add more water, and I'm making these a little bit lighter. The trick with watercolor as well is to start light and add more paint if you want to. So if you are worried about making them too dark, make them light and then add more color later on. Again, this is just a vibes thing. This is a very loosey-goosey painting. This is not very technical in its format here. I am not a watercolor painter. As much as I love it, as much as I did so much of it in college studying fine arts, this is not a watercolor class, obviously. So this is very loose. After I did the flower, I add a little bit of green right on the stem there, just a line down. And that's going to be it for my underpainting for this straight on peony. I do have a second one as well that we're going to show real quick, that second drawing. So let's cover that. Here is our second drawing, and it's okay if you can't see exactly the shapes that I drew with my pencil on the video. I know they get really faint because I erased them just enough where I could still see them. You're going to be able to see yours in person. So remember, we had the two circles, one more towards the side here. I added a little bit of that yellow on the top of the smaller circle, just some dots. And now I'm just doing some letter C shaped strokes underneath that, just kind of cupping the yellow from underneath. Add a little bit more color. We want our darker petals in the center. This is the center of our flower, and then it's blooming outwards to the sides. And just like before, some loose C shapes kind of radiating outside of that, getting lighter as it gets away from the center of the flower. It's okay if they don't look exactly like this. This is mostly going to get covered up with your quilling. We also want to do just a couple of petals coming from the underneath, like they were pulling away. We saw that in one of our reference photos. Just some petal shapes going out to the side. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be exact. I would make them a little bit darker as well, more like the first coral color. And we're going to clean our brush off, grab a little bit of that green. That green is mixed with a little bit of yellow just to make it sort of a sage green to match the paper we're going to use for the stem. And just a quick swoosh down. And that is going to be the base painting for our sideways peony that's starting to bloom. If you feel like you need a little bit more, go ahead and add that. If you're good, you're going to let that dry, and then we're going to start our quilling. So after a little while, our painting is dry and we are ready to start the quilling portion. We are going to add our quilling right to this watercolor paper. The good thing about watercolor paper is that not only is it good for watercolor, it's sturdy enough to hold this bit of quilling we're going to add on it too without warping from the glue. So win-win. I have my yellow that I'm going to start with here. I'm going to add links to all the papers I used in the description box for this video. Don't worry about that. We just need a little bit of the yellow just for the stamen part of this project. And this is a pale yellow, it's called. It's from Quilled Creations. I'm going to mention this is not cardstock paper. I know that sometimes people get nervous about doing on-edge quilling with anything but cardstock. They do have that in these colors. Not what I had on hand. It's the regular weight that they do for all their quilling paper. That is not the cardstock version. And it works just fine in small quantities. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be making an odd number of these little stamen pieces. What I'm going to be doing is just making some loops. I have paper that's about 3/4 of an inch long that I tore into pieces about that long. And I'm rounding them with my needle tool, kind of like curling a ribbon. And then I'm just going to add some glue to the end here. This is just tacky glue. I just put in a little pile on my workboard. If you want to use just a white glue for this part to make these loops instead of dipping it, you can do that as well. After I get the glue on the end, I am going to just pinch that with my fingers. And then after it's dry, I'm just going to snip that jagged edge just to make it nice and even. So don't worry about the fact that the edge looks kind of crazy. We're going to go ahead and just snip that off, just to make it have a straight edge, just so it looks a little bit prettier on our paper. So I have 5 of those made, and we are going to apply them right to the center of our painted peony, right where we started painting with the yellow paint from the very beginning. And I'm adding a little bit of tacky glue to the bottom, dabbing it off on my workboard, and just standing them up right in the center. I'm going to put all 5 right next to each other, and I kind of want them kind of going in a semicircle. So I'm going to kind of bend the bottom just a tad so that they are, once my hand gets out of the way here, you'll see the focus a little bit better. They're kind of going to all go in like a little semicircle in the center, like I said. So we're going to bend some to the left and some to the right so that they all go around that one in the middle. This one's a little bit long, I think. That's the other thing. If you feel like they're long, you can snip them down as well. If they open up, just add some more glue and close that loop again. But once we get all 5 of these together, we're going to be able to move on to the next part of our flower, which is going to be our petals. So there is number 5 on the stamen of our peony right in the center. All the loops are facing up, all the points are facing down, and we're going to start adding on a similar shape that we made out of the darkest of our 3 quilling papers that we had shown in the beginning. I didn't go over those colors when I held them up briefly before. They are also not the cardstock weight. You can use that for this project. Again, that's just not what I had. So I'm going to link to what I have, but again, they do sell a thicker weight, more traditional on edge type paper here as well. But this is also from Quill Creations. It is also 3/8 inch wide. It's called Coral. I made some bigger loops in the same way that I made the yellow loops in the beginning. And I have 2 of those coming up from the bottom, right around where our smaller circle was, where that real deep, intense painting color that we added. And I have them kind of touching each other on the bottom underneath our yellow stamen. And now I'm adding 2 more on the top. So these are going to kind of just encircle our stamen. And then I'm going to fill in the space between these petals and the yellow stamen with some smaller loops in the same way. I want to mention, you've noticed maybe so far I've not included my usual exact measurements and exact dimensions of how much you need here and how long this strip needs to be, because everybody's painting is going to be different. And that is the beauty of this project. It's much more loose, it's much more flowing. You can make 15 of these and they're all going to look a little bit different. So now I'm filling in that space with the smaller loops that I made. and then we will flash forward a little bit. I'm skipping around in this video quite a bit because it's going to be a long one. So we're going to move on until we get all that center filled in, and you'll see what that could look like. And there we go, is our last little loop for the center part of our peony, and we're going to move on to our next layer of flower petals. Now for the rest of this flower, we're going to be making a similar shape to the painting that we did, which is kind of a letter C shape. We're also going to be adding another shape, which is going to look sort of like a letter M, but we will cover that shortly. So I'm using the same coral color here and around the same length as that yellow that we started with, sort of 3/4 of an inch, especially in the center part of the flower, because our petals are going to get a bit bigger as they get to the outside edge. So I'm using my fingers, I'm using my tool, I'm using anything I want to make sort of that shape. And there's no real rhyme or reason to where we're going to place these petals. You can feel it out. They don't have to exactly match the painting. Remember, the painting is just for the illusion that there are more petals than we're actually going to make with our quilling paper. So once you get an idea of where you'd like to place your little paper strip, you're going to dip the bottom and dip the ends in your tacky glue, dot off any excess, and either with your tweezers or with your hand, just place the petal right where you want it. We're starting with that coral color, like I said, and we're going to gradually move out to a lighter color on the outside petals. Once you have the first strip done, you can start with your next petal, but I want to show how we can make kind of a double petal, and that's the one that's going to look like the letter M. So I just take a longer strip, fold it somewhere. I like it to be off center, and then using my needle tool, I'm going to rub that on my strip to kind of make it have a kind of bowed shape on one side of the bend, and then one on the other side of the bend. And then when you hold it up sideways, it sort of looks like a lopsided letter M. So this is a great way to take up a bit of space. That bend in the middle kind of gives the idea that it's 2 petals, even though we're just using 1 piece of paper. And maybe that strip is a little bit long, so you tear it up and go from there, just bending it around. Oh, this is how I'm going to connect the top and the bottom that I made a little bit ago. And we're just going to put some glue on that and get it to sit where we like it. This is a lot of just kind of hold up a paper, see if you like it, maybe make it bigger, maybe make it longer, maybe put it on the other side of the flower. You do whatever you think is best on this. That's the nice thing about the peonies, is that there's so many petals. You can't exactly see where one starts and one ends. So it's just sort of how you feel like making them on these flowers. At this point, I have made kind of an entire ring of my coral color, and I'm ready to move on to the second color I'm going to use, which is called Pale Pink, also from Quill Creations, also still not cardstock paper. You can see it's just a very slightly lighter version of that coral, but they go really nicely together. I'm doing the same thing as I did before. I have about the same length of strip here, about 3/4 of an inch, turn it into a C, and I'm going to see exactly where I want to put it on my flower, where I think it's going to look the best. Like sort of on the side there. What I will give a couple notes when you start to fill in these flowers is, one, don't concentrate too heavily on one side of your flower as you're adding your paper. try to mix it up a little bit and look at the entire flower instead of just doing one side. I also would avoid kind of shingling them all in a circle as it's going around. It's just going to look very like spiral if you do that, which is fine. It just might not end up being the look that you prefer. So I like to kind of add some to one side, add one to the top, add one to the bottom, just kind of mix it up a little bit. And also another note, when you are going from one color to the next color, maybe try to add in here or there the first color that you used again. If you don't kind of intermittently place in the other color as you're changing, you might end up with just solid rings of the colors and it might not blend the way that you want it to. So I'm adding a few petals of the pale pink, and then I'm going to go ahead and, before I get too far into that, put a couple more of the coral color down as well, and then continue on with the pale pink just to mix it up a little bit so it doesn't look like a solid ring of coral, then a solid ring of pink, and then so on and so forth. And we've made some progress with that pale pink, so we're ready to move on with the last color that we're going to be using for this flower, which is ivory, believe it or not. But when it comes with the coral and the pale pink, it pulls out a little bit of pink from those colors as well and really makes it look like it's just a very, very light pink altogether. So same situation, but this time I'm making my petals a little bit bigger. I don't know if you can see also some of those pale pink around the edges are getting even bigger as well. So same thing though, adding a little strip, adding a little glue, and I'm going to keep going until I'm almost covering all the paint. Personal preference, but I like to see a little bit of those painted lines coming through the outside of the flower. I just think it adds, like I said, a little bit more dimensionality to the entire piece. So there's a real big M shape that I added on to the left side there. And it looks like I need a little bit more on this side still. So I'm going to add some to the right. And we're just getting it to look exactly how we want it. I appreciate everyone sticking with me here. I know this isn't my usual style and I am skipping around a lot, but the video would have been about 2 hours long maybe if I did show step by step of me measuring every single little paper strip and getting it exactly where I wanted it. So I'm hoping that my ideas are coming through here. I'm just getting my last few petals of that ivory exactly where I want them to be, so I can still see a little bit of the painting coming through and making it look as even as I want it to. So at this point I have all my petals on. You can see how it's going from dark to light and how the petals are mostly getting bigger as they go to the outside. And if you look closely, you can see some of that underpainting coming through as well, especially around the edges. Now we're ready just to add on our stem, which is just a simple matter of eyeball measuring a bit of a color I liked by Quilt Creations as well, called Sage Green. It is also 3/8 inch wide, still not cardstock, still just regular weight quilling paper. And same thing as the rest of the piece, we are just going to dip in to our tacky glue, get it lined up on one side of our stem painting, and then we're going to add another piece to the other side of our stem just to give it a little bit of width because it's not a super skinny stem. It's got to hold up that big flower. So there's our second half, and a little bit harder to put in than our first, especially with your fingers, so quilling tweezers are definitely going to be your friend for this project. And I just like to get it on either side of my painting that I made of the stem, but it's okay if you see some of the painting coming through the sides, just like you can with the flower. Also, while we're holding the stem in place for a second, I do want to mention, in addition to tweezers really being kind of a necessary for this project, I did talk about how I was dipping everything in tacky glue, and that really is going to speed up your project a lot. So if you don't have any tacky glue, I would pick some up for this project. It'll make it a little bit easier. But there is our finished peony flower. Let's move along to the second version now, and this one's going to go even faster because at this point you kind of get the basics. We're really just changing up a little bit. Most of that is being the yellow stamen for this flower. Instead of making loops, we're just making tight coils out of that same length of paper, about 3/4 of an inch or so, rolling it all the way up on your needle tool and gluing the end down without letting it unroll at all. So we're just making these tight little circles, and we're just going to glue an odd number of those. I would say 5 or 7, depending on the size. If your flower is really, really large, by all means, make more. We're just going to glue them right where we painted our yellow in our underpainting. And then we're going to add our coral colored loops underneath that only. So here I am adding the last, I just did 5, just making a nice cup underneath our yellow stamen. And then at that point, we're just going to start adding our C shapes or our M shapes, if that is how you would like to do it, above those coral loops in the same coral color. If they need to touch the stamen, that is okay. That'll make everything nice and sturdy for you. I'm going to add this other one to the other side, starting sort of the shingling of the petals. Get some glue, dab it off. I'm going to put this one over here somewhere. There we go. And then we're going to go from there in a similar style, starting with the darkest color and moving outwards to have a little bit of a lighter color. But I am using the same 3 shades on this flower as I did on the last one. So I'm adding some of the paper in one of the M shapes, still with the coral. Gonna add a little bit more of that onto one side, and then another one on the other side. We're really going to power through this one here and go really, really fast. And once I start to add on the next color, that light pink, you can see it really start to take shape, and you'll also notice that most of the petals are being added to the top of this shape flower instead of all around in a circle. So all that coral color is concentrated towards the center and the bottom, and then it gets a little bit lighter pink, and then it gets a little bit of that ivory towards the very top, but not all the way around like the first flower. So 2 different shapes of flowers. And we're just filling in our last bit of ivory now, seeing where we need a little bit more to make it a little bit more even. And we'll add this one over to this side. And then I don't know if you can see what I can see, that it needs a little bit more in that bottom left hand side of our flower, just to make it look even more, I don't want to say symmetrical, because obviously it's not, the petals are all over the place, but just a little bit more of that kind of baseball looking flower shape that we're looking for from this perspective of the peony. So a nice big petal right about there. You can still see some of the paint peeking through. Let's get our glue on, and that will finish up that piece there. And then we can add the end, which is going to be the petals on the bottom. And for these, I just kind of measured with my fingers the outline shapes and then tore them. So here's the bottom of this shape, and I really like the look of the paint coming from underneath on these as well. So this is not lined up perfectly. You'll be able to see some paint coming through. If you have a small paintbrush handy that is clean, you can use that if you have any excess glue coming from the underneath. It's more so in these petals than the ones in the rest of the flower. But I know I can see some glue coming from the underneath of that one I just added on. So I'm going to go ahead later on after I put this top piece on with a little paintbrush and just clear that up, just so even though it's going to dry clear, it gets out of there. So that is the top one. I'm going to do the same thing to the other petals, and then I'm going to add on my stem just like before. And that's going to be about it. That is my finished peony from the side. And at this point, let me get all my little bits and bobs out of here so we can see everything all together. We have the peony we just finished. We have another version of the original one I showed here as well, just from a different angle. Let's say you want to just use one color. You can just use one color. I just made a little bit more negative space, did a little bit fewer petals, same vibes, just with one color of quilling paper and still an underpainting. Let's say that now all those petals are just a little bit too much for you to jump right into. You can do the same idea with a looser shaped flower and just make 6 petals. These are just petal shapes that I made out of quilling paper. Did 3 on the inside and then added the 3 outside ones, and that's it. It's the same idea with an underpainting of watercolor, just to add more depth without having to make all the flower petals. You can do a lot of things with this technique. Let me know in the comment section if you like the idea of adding watercolor to your quilling paper, if you have any other flowers you'd like to see or any other ideas with this same technique you want me to try, and I will try to make videos for those in the future. I always appreciate your suggestions. I will add links to all the supplies I used in the description box for this video, as well as a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate a little extra support to my channel and also see some quilling extras I have there for you as well. The help is always appreciated, definitely keeps the channel growing. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can be around for the next video, and I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.